Thank you, Stephen. And of course, Susan Eisenhower.
Jason, thank you very much. I'd also like to express my appreciation to the Office of OSTP and to the White House for making this very important opportunity available to the nuclear industry to tell its story. I think it's an extremely important recognition. I'm honored to be able to be here with you today. Let me just say to Jason's very nice introduction that nuclear energy has always been intimately tied to national security, always, from the very beginning. From Atoms for Peace, it was seen as a way to bring the Soviet Union to the bargaining table, in addition to bringing the enormous benefits of nuclear power to commercial uses. But today, we have another aspect that's been raised earlier about climate change. And I would submit that climate change is probably not only a national security issue, it's a global security issue. This can no longer be discussed as a matter of climate science, in my view. This needs to be seen as the greatest threat, actually not just to our children, but to the existing order and the sustainability, actually, even of our international political system. If the scientists are correct about the level of dislocation that is going to occur over the coming decades, this is not something that we should stand idly by to ponder and to question. I would say today, having listened to these terrific presentations, that as much as we are here and expressing concern, I don't think that the United States or the international community's response is commensurate with the threat. Any great strategist would stand back and say, what is your timeline, what are the consequences, and who is involved? With respect to the timeline, we know that it is many decades forward. As a matter of fact, the word 100 years got mentioned here today. 100 years is not long. I don't know, many people in this room probably just have grandchildren that were born in the last year or in the last couple of years. They will live until that 100-year mark. Many of them will. And so this is not an academic exercise. This is actually going to impact our offspring and their offspring. In any case, I think we've got many things that we have to do when we're thinking about this threat and the timeline. And first of all, I would recommend that we start having a debate that aligns with the timeline we're looking at. Number one, and I've heard no one say it, when is natural gas going to be a fuel that we can no longer use? We call it sometimes a transition fuel, but what is that date, and are we working against that date? It could well be because the current situation is so complex in terms of the retirements, and I think this was very well said, between the retirements of coal and nuclear plants, that we could have an enormous gap. But if we don't keep our nuclear industry in the game, we're going to find out that that point at which gas becomes no longer usable for meeting our climate objectives, we will not have the workforce and the capability in this country to continue that. The other point I'd like to make is that renewables, and I'm a great supporter of renewables, but the one thing that never or rarely gets mentioned in that context is the need for transmission. We are not factoring in the length of time it takes to site transmission. That can be anywhere between 5 and 10 years, about the impact on local communities, in addition to bringing on new sources from very distant parts of the country into the marketplace. And so that transmission issue has to be integral to what we're talking about today. Then, I guess, if we are looking at the important topic of innovation, the one point I also would like to emphasize, along with others, is the fact that innovation is challenged in this country, especially in the nuclear area, because it just has gotten to seem too hard. And I want to thank our speaker from MIT, who so elegantly expressed the potential in the future. But if we don't, again, keep our nuclear plants online and America in the game, other countries, and we've seen this from China, will be developing the technologies of the future. I see no reason why this shouldn't be a source of enormous concern from a national security perspective. Finally, in the security area, of course, nuclear has always been tied to the non-proliferation question. I don't think we have to think much beyond the megatons to megawatts program when we converted highly rich uranium, or the Russians did, and downblended into reactor-usable fuel. And certainly for those 20,000 warheads that were aimed on the United States, that fuel went on to power 1 in every 10 light bulbs in this country. During the megatons to megawatts program, they were blending down 3 bombs a year over this 20-year period, and it's an extraordinary success story of non-proliferation. So taken together, it seems to me that one way to bring about a change in our narrative here is to place fully climate change in the national security and global security arena. And as my mentor, General Andrew J. Goodpaster, used to say, that there are long poles in any big strategic tent. In the energy strategic tent, or in the national security tent, obviously energy is a long pole in the national security tent, but nuclear is probably the longest pole of all in the carbon tent. We need to bring a sense of urgency to this, whether all Americans agree with this urgent agenda or not. And the benefits are certainly going to outweigh the effort that we place in this enterprise. Thank you.